Oh, yes. Welcome to a special edition of High at Nine News where we have the opportunity to sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with none other than Aubrey Amatelli of PayRio Payment Solutions. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. How are you?
I am amazing. How are you?
Oh, I am equally as amazing. That is for sure.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
So lots of interesting things going on within the financial world around payment solutions, banking. I know I still get a ton of emails every day with all these different individuals going and trying to sell me on their I don't know if they're what you call them, those cashless ATMs and their PIN-based debit cards and all these other different financial solutions. I get tons of emails every day, and you know what I do with them? I just hit the trash because I figure that's what they all are.
Yeah, payment processing is it's all over the place right now in cannabis, very controversial. And I think hitting the trash button on the majority of those is the right move for sure.
Amazing. Amazing. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, how you got into payment solutions and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, so I would say that I'm a glorified payment geek. I've been in payments my entire career. I started at JP Morgan and was there for over a decade in their payments division. So really grew up under Jamie Dimon's leadership, but JP Morgan being the largest credit and debit card processor in the world, I had a really wonderful education on payments. Fast forward at the end of my time at JP Morgan, I became a commercial banker in their fintech group, so their disruptive commerce and technology group that Jamie Dimon put together had to go head to head with SVB. So at the time, JP Morgan didn't play in that space in the Silicon Valley, and they started to. Of course, everything that happened with SVB a while back, JP Morgan came out on top. I left that position to be the chief revenue officer at a fintech based out of Australia and Los Angeles. Had got to dive back into the startup world. You know, I was born and raised in Silicon Valley, so it was nice to get back into that world. And after about a year, my passion just rose for helping industries in need with their payment options. And I knew I had this superpower that I learned from JP Morgan to do so. So that's how PayRio was born, supporting cannabis, CBD, alternative medicines, you name it, we help them with their payment solutions. And it's really wonderful to bring my knowledge into industries that are very new to payments and need help deciphering what solution is the best for them. So,
Well, that's
a wild
awesome.
ride. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your help and talking with us today. Now, you mentioned SVB, which stands for Silicon Valley Bank. And
Yes.
they had very large number of cannabis accounts there when they recently collapsed. Can you kind of go into a brief overview of what happened there and what the outcome was once they collapsed?
So SVB was very big, especially in the Silicon Valley, in supporting pre-profit or pre-profit lending. So companies that were pre-profit startups in helping their business grow and lending a lot of money. What I think, or what happened, is they really overextended themselves to the point where when the public saw how overextended they were, they started to pull back and pull away and pull their money out of the bank. And that ultimately is what caused the collapse very slowly. So they had a really great appetite to support the Silicon Valley, but I think they were a little too eager, and it caused the issues for the bank to collapse.
And basically what happened with all those cannabis customers that were basically left high and dry trying to extrapolate their money out of the bank after its collapse?
I don't know, Jason,
You
actually,
don't
on
know.
that. So that was very new, early into my enter into cannabis. So I'm not on necessarily the banking side, but the payment side. So I know they all found a spot.
They did.
Probably not with my alma mater, JP Morgan, but they definitely found a spot.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Yeah, it was a big. I know I was in a number of different group chats and people were panicking all over the place trying to figure out what to do. A lot of them went to different community banks
Hmm.
for a large part of them. I know some of them went to a well-known bank, Dama, that's pretty well prevalently known within the cannabis space. But can you explain kind of the difference in regards to what's the main difference? Because if I have a bank, right, I'm sure there's probably a lot of people that don't actually have a cannabis business, so they may not actually understand this. And a lot of people have banks, but with payment processing, that's basically for merchant accounts and people selling goods online. But it can also be hosted for a few other things. Can you kind of go on that a little bit?
On the payment processing side,
Yeah,
or the bank?
what's the major differences for people in between a bank and a payment processor in regards to how they actually get their money?
Yeah, so the bank is who's holding your funds, and finding the right bank, especially in cannabis, is hard because it's until the Safe Banking Act passes, those banks are still at risk.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's a lot more expensive to get a cannabis banking account.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it range anywhere from $500 all the way up to $1,500 a month, which is excessive. It's a large fee, but it also is covering that bank for being able to support the cannabis or the dispensary. But from a payment standpoint, we are indifferent what bank our customers use, as long as we're able to deposit into that bank. But from a processor needs a bank sponsor or a bank that has the appetite to process payments in the industry that the processor wants to go into, whether it's cannabis seeds, psilocybin spores, CBD. So, as a processor, we do have to have a very tight partnership with a bank who has an appetite to process payments in that industry. And especially in our space, is a needle in a haystack. So,
Mm-hmm.
finding that bank partner and that bank sponsor is really important to power payments for dispensaries and e-commerce companies alike.
So, I guess it's time to tag your sponsor.
That is a very coveted piece of information, Jason, that we do not share at all.
I feel you on that. I feel you on that. Got to keep the secret sauce, without a
Yes,
doubt.
exactly.
So with all these different payment solutions, I know like there's pin based debit, which I've never seen as a real payment solution for the cannabis space, mainly because with a credit card, who in the hell knows their pin number for a credit card, first of all? Then secondly, you have a lot of these cashless ATMs, which I don't really understand either. And can you kind of go into how these things got offered to be payment solutions in the first place?
So, because cannabis is still considered federally illegal, the payment brands, Visa, MasterCard,
Mm-hmm.
Discover, and Amex, do not want to support payments through, their rails. So until, I always say when the Safe Banking Act passes, we're that much closer to being able to process payments through the normal rails.
Mm-hmm.
When the Safe Banking Act passes, the payment brands actually have to decide if they want to participate in payments, I think within 90 days. So it'll be a quick turnaround when that happens. But so
That's that
sorry,
that's that's 90 days from the day after President Biden would sign this into law if it were to pass this fall as predicted by many DC insiders.
that's what I recently read. So it would be nice, for that to happen so that we can transition and not have to go through different hoops or different back end processes to be able to support dispensaries with their payment needs.
Mm-hmm.
Once that passes, we can process payments in cannabis just like we can with CBD.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow! Can you touch on that a little bit as far as with the processing on CBD? Because you also mentioned too that you guys also allow for payment processing of things like THCA, along with even the fungi's in the room.
Yeah. So, dependent on, as I mentioned, the bank sponsor is the most important part, right? And they have to have an appetite for the industry that they want to support in payments.
Mm-hmm.
CBD, cannabis seeds, because they're below 0.03%
Yep.
THC.
Yep.
Uh,
Those are not
and then
those are not considered THC because it's just a seed.
They aren't
Yes.
considered THC. They grow up to be the beautiful medicine
Hmm.
that we all love, but at the time of the seed, they aren't considered THC. It doesn't mean that every bank and every credit card processor wants to or can support that industry or has the appetite to support it. But those industries, they can be processed through the normal rails. So Visa, Mastercard, Discover, and Amex have no problem
Hmm.
processing payments in those industries, which is wonderful. It's what the cannabis industry can look forward to, hopefully very soon. The issue is just finding that bank sponsor and that processor that specializes in those industries. If you were to, can't Safe Banking Act passed and you just wanted to knock on Square's door or Stripe or Adyen or some of the fintech players in the payment
Hmm.
space, you might get an approval immediately because they don't really dive deep into your business. It's almost a numbers game for them. But then very later down the line, when their portfolio is audited, those companies would be shut out. I know a lot of the CBD cannabis seed or spore listeners out there would be like shaking their head. Yes, I've signed up with a payment processor. I thought I was all good. And all of a sudden, 6 months down the line, they just shut my account off without any warning. That is because that bank sponsor doesn't support that industry. It's just in the environment they were onboarded as a number instead of as a customer and getting to know their business.
Hmm.
It's the Wild West out there for payments, and I think that's where finding a processor or a partner that specializes in the industry is really important. And my mission is to figure out how to normalize payment and spread my payments, and spread my knowledge so that companies understand how to find a safe place or a safe home for their business so they don't have to continue to sign up for new merchant accounts over and over and over again.
Oh, I'm sure that can just be a total nightmare over and
Yeah.
over. And the amount of data entry and the amount of employee hours that are just lost doing the same repetitive data entry is just insurmountable.
Yeah, the onboarding. I've
Hmm.
had 2 or 3 calls this morning coming into the company saying, "Hey, we want to know about your payments, but we need to vet you out because we've been dropped 3, 4 times already in the last 12 months, and we want to make sure you're a solid place to go."
Hmm.
And that's really what the industry is facing right now, and what we're trying to help change, and why I'm grateful to be here to educate whoever wants to know about payments on the how to find what to look for and where to find a secure good home to be on
Yeah,
at.
that's a great pivot into my next question. Actually, you set me up perfectly for that one. What are the most common things that consumers should look for, or kind of like what are the most common red flags when you are searching for a payment processor that you should definitely watch out for from these payment processors?
I would say the number one is if you can be approved instantly, that's a red flag. It's
Hmm.
great to be approved instantly, okay, but then that means they didn't really get to know your business and what you're processing payments for. And so, as I mentioned earlier, when their accounts are audited to actually dive deep into the website, look at what the payments are for, that's when the plug gets pulled right away. So an instant approval isn't the best thing. You want to partner with a processor who takes time to go through the underwriting and get to know your business and make sure your website fits all the Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and Discover guidelines that a website needs to match. And
Hmm.
so what we do and what other processors do that specialize in these industries, is we do the upfront underwriting, which might only take a few days, but we do that up front. We tell our customers, hey, here's a couple changes you need to make on your website. Can you answer these questions for us? And then ultimately, we get the approval. Once they're approved, that's a safe home. They don't have to worry about ever being shut off, but
Hmm.
there is an upfront process that happens before that approval, but you want to look for that. You want to look for a processor who wants to take the time to get to know your business, who is partnered with a bank sponsor, or who has other clients that are in your industries. That's a good indication that it's a safe place to be. Instant payment processing approval sounds really great, especially if you're desperate and need for that support, but that's a red flag to me, a big one.
How long should people typically wait for an approval, or expect to get approval when they do sign up for these types of services?
I would say about 48 to 72 hours,
Oh, that's
with
not
a
bad.
complete, yeah, with a complete application package and with a clean, with a website, no hidden products or no backlinks to other websites. If it's clean, we could approve very quickly. And others because we specialize in this industry, for example, we have a lot of cannabis seed e-commerce companies or psilocybin spore companies. We know what to look for. We know the questions to ask. So our approval is a lot quicker because we have experience
You guys
doing
are
that.
more familiar within the space and you guys know what to ask people for that they're trying to hide, that they shouldn't be trying to hide kind of things. And
Exactly.
yeah.
We're and we, we look if we see something that's hidden, we'll talk to the customer, because they most likely don't need to hide it because we love this industry, but they're so used to having to hide things
Hmm.
in the background. And that's just for the safety of them and for all of our ecosystem. If we have a
Hmm.
bad apple in our ecosystem, it could cause issues for the rest. So
Yeah, it definitely, that is how it works generally. You have one bad apple and they spoil them all. That is
yeah.
without a doubt. Now, there's been a lot of news in the last couple weeks in regards with payment information, regards with mainly with cannabis, with actual plant. There's been a number of companies, Mastercard, I think, being the most prevalent one, that has came out and said that they're not interested in processing, or they are ceasing to process cannabis sales. And I just have to wonder if this is going to be a trend that we see amongst these other credit card companies. And at the same time, if safe banking passes, would that give enough cover for a company like MasterCard to retract their previous statements?
Great question. So, what's happening with MasterCard is definitely taking the cannabis industry by storm. But what MasterCard is doing is what they're supposed to do.
Hmm.
It's a federally illegal product today, unfortunately. And so companies, dispensaries are not allowed to process cannabis payments because there is no MCC code. An MCC code is a merchant category code. So
Hmm.
every industry has their own merchant category code or MCC code. There isn't one for cannabis today. Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, they haven't created one. And so the way that some processors are trying to get around the system is by putting a false MCC code or an MCC code that doesn't match, like florist.
Hmm.
And so what happened really was I think MasterCard was made aware that there were certain processors processing payments through an MCC code that wasn't the right one,
Hmm.
and they did their investigation and were able to point out those companies and tell them to stop processing until, like you said, maybe the Safe Banking Act passes or an MCC code is made for cannabis. There are compliant ways to process payments in cannabis. PIN debit is one of them, through what I call the secondary debit rails. So
Hmm.
there's about 16 different debit rails. The top 10 are partnered with Visa and MasterCard, meaning if that PIN debit network like Star, Accel, NYCE, you might have seen like Shazam on the back of
Hmm.
a debit card. Those debit networks have their own rules and regulations and they are pro cannabis. So, but they also have partnerships with the big payment brands because if they get a decline, they usually have a switch that puts that transaction through MasterCard or through Visa, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So, so that's what was happening. PIN debit networks can compliantly process payments in cannabis, but if they're using that switch or if they're pointing the transactions to MasterCard and Visa, that is really where the stop was made.
Mm.
MasterCard and Visa doesn't want to take those transactions, but the PIN debit networks can. So there are processors still processing payments compliantly. They're just utilizing networks that are okay with cannabis and have appetite for it. Kind of like banking, right? Not
Hmm.
every bank is going to bank a cannabis or a dispensary,
Correct.
but some have appetite. There is risk to that because of where cannabis stands with the federal government, but ultimately, you just have to kind of find that needle in a haystack as a dispensary too.
Hmm. Yeah, no. And I just wonder too, in regards with all this, chargebacks. So I remember we used to accept credit cards a long, long time ago, back before it was really a thing. And I remember that someone had came in and spent a couple $1,000 on product with their American Express card. And I learned this really interesting thing about American Express and their internal policy, mainly when it comes to cannabis specifically, is that, and I believe this would be the similar policy, I think, for all credit card companies. And I think it's something that every single cannabis retailer should be aware of, because this is a potentiality. And I really love to hear your thoughts and insight, and if you guys have any types of protocols in place that combat this. Is basically, I can go into any cannabis store as someone 21 and over and make whatever purchases I want and put them on my credit card. And I then can leave the store and keep everything. And then I then can call my credit card company and tell them to do a chargeback on that card because I did not realize that I was purchasing a Schedule 1 substance. And at which point they will do a full reversal of the credit card charge, and it leaves the retailer high and dry with no recourse. And now they're out that product and they're out the money from the sale.
Yes, chargebacks are a big thorn in any business's side, and you're correct. Because for the card issuers, for Amex, Chase Sapphire, you name it, the big ones, right? Their customers are always right.
Yep,
So if their
exactly.
customer calls and asks for their money back, unless there's certain scenarios that I'm going to mention, the representative on the phone is going to say, "Oh, okay, you don't recognize that transaction," or whatever reason the customer gives, and they're going to automatically give the customer their money back immediately, no questions asked, because that's their customer. Then they go out to the merchant and the dispensary, and they say, "Hey, here's a chargeback. Here's the customer's name. Here's the amount.
Here's the date and
As
the time of the transaction, all of those information.
and everything you need to know." And now it's in your hands to go and fight the chargeback. But as you mentioned, fighting a chargeback in cannabis is really hard. You know, I always recommend to our customers, if that does happen, to call their customer up and ask why, and maybe offer a refund or an exchange or something along those lines. But chargebacks are hard for merchants in any industry. Even at JP Morgan, working with some of the largest e-commerce companies in the world, even though chargebacks were a very small percentage of their business, we'd have an hour-long meeting and we'd spend 45 minutes on it because it's frustrating. The consumer, unless it's a fraud situation, some consumers know how to work the system and get their money back. How we help protect our customers is, what's very important is the card. If the card is present and that chip technology is used, that protects the business from the chargeback. So if I'm a consumer and I go and purchase and I use my chip on my card, and I go to my Chase Sapphire and I ask for a chargeback, Chase Sapphire actually says, "Hey, we see this was a card present transaction with a chip because of a liability shift that happened in payments about 5 years ago." Chase Sapphire says, "Please call the establishment to work out a refund or understand what this charge is about." So there's certain steps you can put in place to help protect your business from chargebacks, but sometimes they still sneak through even when the card is present. That's a really important way to keep chargebacks low. But when you open it up to an e-commerce environment, that's where no matter what reason, a consumer can call and get a chargeback every time. If it's in a card not present e-commerce environment, you don't really have a lot of protection from that unless you have fraud tools in place. So there's lots. Yeah.
So your advice to dispensaries and whatnot would make sure that if you guys are going to be accepting credit cards as a form of payment and debit cards as a form of payment, that it would be a chip-based insert in order to complete the transaction, and that would really protect you from those types of instances, or what would you call them, a predatory customer?
Yes. So card present, chip-based is even better, but when a card is present and that transaction is present, they are much more protected than if it's taking a payment online or outside of a card present scenario.
Yeah, well, so in our instance, the card was present because we had a little terminal, and we just slid the card through the terminal, da 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 da, process the amount, they hit okay, all of that type of stuff. And we still ended up getting the charge back, mainly because they said it was a Schedule 1 substance, and therefore it's not allowed to be, commerce is not allowed to happen with on their electronic platform.
See, that's the first time, Jason, I've heard of that. You might have just given listeners something that they can call and say now to get the immediate charge back. But the ones that I see come through our system in the e-commerce or card present environment is always typically a duplicate transaction or something along those lines.
Mm.
So that might be a loophole for consumers to get a chargeback. I wasn't aware of that specific reason, but it sounds like it worked, especially if the card was present for you.
Yes, the card was present. We always had the card present, and that definitely worked. At least it did work with. This was an American Express card that was charged during the instance that I'm referencing, and so but at the same time, like I'm always very leery of the credit card space in regards, because we don't have safe banking, and so but it sounds like you guys have some really good steps in place to help mitigate those concerns that retailers have, because there is a big difference in sales numbers when retailers are able to offer these types of payment solutions as opposed to only accepting cash.
There is, and that's a transition that the market's trying to make from cash all the way to all of these different solutions. You mentioned cashless ATM. There's also ACH or bank to bank transfer solutions. So it's the way that we should be moving, and hopefully the Safe Banking Act will get us to where we need to be. But in the interim, it's finding the partner that helps you and walks you through the safest way to accept payments. And chargebacks is a big one. If you can eliminate chargebacks, it could be a huge savings to your company and a revenue boost for you as well.
Not to mention a big increase in productivity hours from employees.
Oh, yes. I know there's a lot of return. Yeah. How would you want to fight a chargeback and spend 2 hours and pay your employee 2 hours to fight that,
Yep.
or let it go because it was $40 and move on?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Sometimes you just have to just lick your wounds and just keep it moving.
Exactly. Yeah, chargebacks are a thorn in the side, and in many cases you just have to accept them, but finding a solution that keeps those very low is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now with all of these different payment process, you mentioned too, because there's a lot of talk within the cannabis spaces about THCA, and there's a number of companies that are actually selling THCA flower online and shipping it to, I want to say, close to 45 states or so, or 44 states, because all of those states allow for smokable hemp in regards with their laws within those states. And so I know you said that you can help people out in regards to that. Can you touch on that and how that process works in regards with THCA and internet sales?
Yeah, so with THCA, THCO, all the Delta 8s, 9s, 10s, it all depends on the state by state regulations. And so when we are onboarding customers, we actually look into their shipping policy. Where are they shipping it? Where are they allowed to ship it? And what products can be added to the cart? So as long as it's below 0.03% THC, it is, legal to sell. It just, every state has different regulations. And so as a processor, we are very strict, as we should be, on making sure that our customers are shipping to states where it is illegal and not breaking any of those rules on a state by state basis. But it is possible, as long as it's below 0.03% THC, it's considered like a CBD.
Yeah, I find it so fascinating that people are using this loophole in order to do this. I find it extremely fascinating on this THCA one, just personally. Yes, I get a kick out of it.
Yeah, it's considered hemp though, right? On the hemp side of the house.
Well, see, and I'm willing to. I've talked about this with a couple lawyers. I know I've talked about this on the show at High at 9 News in regards to this. But I'm willing to think that if someone was pulled over with flour in a state, I'm willing to bet that they could argue that it is classified as hemp under the Farm Bill because THC delta 9, which is the compound that they're saying that is Schedule 1 federally illegal, really doesn't actually occur in cannabis until it is decarboxylated. So therefore, if you just had dry flower in your car, I think you could make a legal argument to say that it's all THCA because it hasn't turned into THC delta 9 yet because it hasn't been decarboxylated.
I wonder how that would go. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I wonder how that would go if you did get pulled over.
Yeah, I just,
How would they actually tell even the difference between
oh,
THC?
I'm telling you, I'm willing to bet it'll take about 4 hours of your day for the cops to even figure all of this out and understand what's going on and all this. And oh man, I can just imagine their minds are just going.
What do we do?
Yeah. Exactly. They don't
Maybe
know what to do. I mean, I was at a cannabis convention in Florida, and there was a bunch of retailers that were all hemp farmers from Florida that were all had hemp all displayed in glass jars, just as if you were at like an old school cannabis cup and just able to just go and purchase cannabis freely. And a friend of mine walked up to the law enforcement there, the Florida law enforcement, and they asked, and there's like, can you tell the difference between weed and hemp? And they couldn't tell the difference. So I think it's very, very interesting from an enforcement and compliance standpoint of where the cannabis industry is really growing and leading. And I want to thank you for all your work on this payment solution side, because I know that is a really, really big deal because no one can pay their bills if they're not able to sell their weed.
It's constantly evolving, just like what you talked about with the cops and how do we, but as long as you're staying up to date with the rules and regulations, then I think you're in a good spot. It's when
Hmm.
you start to veer off course and cut corners that it'll catch up to you. So we do have to ride the wave and and be fully compliant as we do, I think to get through the storm, right? Until
Hmm.
we have smoother waters. So
And one more question in regards with this payment processing stuff. I know that a lot of in regards with banking regulations and federal currency regulations and whatnot. One of the other big components to payment solutions is where your bin is actually located. And I've done a little bit of research on this. And basically, your bin is wherever geographically that the physical transaction actually exchanges on the internet. Did I explain that correctly?
are you talking about that in terms of purchasing online?
Um,
Like
it,
in
it,
an
could- it could be online or it could be an in person in store, but it really matters where your bin is actually located, where that payment has actually happened, because your payment, the commerce laws on financial laws actually are governed by where that is.
Exactly. So in the card present environment where the payment is happening physically, card present is important. And there are some states where cannabis isn't legal. So we don't, you can't support those states. And then
Hmm.
in e-commerce environment, what actually matters is where it's shipping to, where the products are going to be delivered. That zip code, that location. So the bin number stays the same, no matter what. My bin number is always the same, but where my bin number is being used or where my bin number is used, where it's shipping
Hmm.
to. Yes, you're right. That is important.
Did you get bin number 420?
I wish.
You should be able to pay for that. You should be able to get bin number
Yeah,
420. That would
yeah,
be that
that'd
would
be good.
be that would be
I'm pretty
amazing.
sure there are plenty of people before me who would want that. Who would want that one.
Well, I think it's all about who asked first, isn't it?
You're right. I
Yes.
should call. I should
Yes.
ask. Right after this, I will.
Amazing. Amazing. So, it has been amazing having you on today. I really appreciate all of your time. Top 3 things that people should look out for in the payment processing space, and top 3 things people should look for in a provider when they're looking to bring a payment solution into their business.
Ooh, good one. So, top three from a payment processing space.
Hmm.
Uh, Experience in payments
Hmm.
is very important. whether it's the leadership, the team, or just a track record of customers. Asking for, ask them, dive deep into the way that the funds are flowing and look into the compliance piece.
Hmm.
And references. I think references are so important. So ask for those. That's a payment processing space. What was the second one?
The second one is what should people look? What are the top three things that they should look for within a payment processor when trying to determine which one to use?
Everything being domestic. That's very important. Domestic bank, domestic processor. Keep it here. When funds go offshore, that could cause issues. I would recommend to not play in the cryptocurrency space. So I would stay out of there for now. Those are the two big ones, and I think just the track record again from a payment processor is really important.
I find it interesting that cannabis was always sold on the track, and you're now mentioning the track record. Awesome. Is there anything else that you'd like to inform our viewers on in regards? And I really want to thank Aubrey Amatelli from PayRio for joining us today.
For having me.
Yes.
I would say just take your time finding a payment solution. You don't want to, as we mentioned earlier, spend a ton of time and hours onboarding with a solution that it isn't right for you or could be shut off. So take your time, be patient, because the time you take beforehand will really pay off in saving time after. So take your time, don't be hasty. It might be cash only, or accepting checks for the mail. Some of our customers have done that as well on the e-commerce side. But take your time to find the right solution, because it'll pay off in the end.
So your moral of the story is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly. I was going to say that next. So
I bet.